And good evening. It's May 30th, 2024, and welcome to another one of our branches on the vine with the Bible Project and, of course, the Sermon on the Mount series. So the Bible Project, they created this series to cover an entire year. Every 5 weeks, they're going to release another major episode. And we're going to take some time to discuss each of these episodes and some of the other creative topics that they present. Because the videos that they're going to be discussing are just the tip of the iceberg. They're part of a learning series that I highly recommend, and of course they can all be found on the Bible Project app. Link to that is in the description. So welcome this evening to episode 5 of Sermon on the Mount. Don't make oaths, turn the other cheek, love your enemies, but why? This is part 2 on the Dusty Feet. And of course, before we forget, if you find these kinds of podcasts useful, that's when you click the subscribe button. The reminders, they just help you. But also, you think these might be useful to others, it's when you click that like button, because that is the way that YouTube chooses to share these to more people, if they wish. So this sermon, again, is found in Matthew 5 through 7. And for me, this is the seminal moment in the teachings of Jesus, because this is his longest, deepest, widest teaching we have recorded in all of Scripture. And of course, it covers things that we love to talk about, yet deep down, I think really have challenges living out in our everyday lives. So, the Sermon on the Mount, Episode 5. Don't make oaths. Turn the other cheek. Love your enemies. But why? This is part 2 of 3. So, let's refresh our memories with the video, and we're going to see where it takes us. So enjoy.
Conflict in relationships is unavoidable. Even with your friends and family, maintaining peace is a struggle.
And it's even more difficult with our enemies, people who are out to get us.
Right. This is true of any time and any place in human history. Where there are people, there is strife and violence.
And this was definitely true in the time of Jesus, when Roman forces occupied the lands of Israel. So in his teachings, Jesus gives a radical vision for how his followers can seek peace in the midst of this conflict and work to repair even the most difficult relationships.
Jesus is an Israelite, and he believes that God's wisdom for relationships is found in the covenant laws given to ancient Israel.
And so in these teachings, Jesus will quote from one of those laws and then show the wisdom that's underneath.
So Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said to the ancients, 'Do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made.'"
Now, in Israel, an oath was a type of promise where you swear by God that you will do what you say.
Like if you want to borrow some money, you could swear by God to repay me.
Exactly. And you can trust me because in Israel's covenant laws, God requires me to keep my oaths.
So oaths are a great way to avoid disputes.
You would think so, but even oaths can be twisted to take advantage of people. For example, what if I swear by God's temple that I will repay you?
Well, I know the law requires you to honor your oath, so it's a deal.
But I didn't exactly swear by God, just by his temple. So I'm not really bound to the oath.
So you're tricking me into trusting you.
Exactly. So Jesus cuts through all of this and says, just don't make oaths at all, by God or by anything else in God's world.
Never make a promise to anyone?
Well, not quite. His point is that when you do make a promise, don't use God's reputation as a tool to manipulate people.
Right, Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no be no.
Being a peacemaker starts with a radical commitment to honesty and integrity.
Now, I can see how this works if I started the conflict, but what if someone else starts a conflict with me?
Well, the next case study actually gets into exactly that.
Jesus quotes from the Torah, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth."
This is a famous line known as the law of retaliation.
Yeah, you harm me, I can harm you back. This kind of sounds like a license for revenge that can get out of hand.
Well, actually, this law was designed to limit the amount of retribution you can demand. It should be equal to the amount of harm done and not more.
So this law keeps peace by restraining our urge to hurt back those who hurt us.
Yes, and Jesus takes the wisdom of this law to a new level, telling his followers, don't even pay back an evil person.
Don't retaliate at all?
Yes, become people who value peace more than getting even.
But letting people get away with evil won't bring peace. You just can't stand by and do nothing.
Hold on, Jesus doesn't say do nothing. Rather, he advocates a really bold and creative response to evil that is nonviolent, so it can open the door for peace.
What does that look like?
Well, Jesus gives 3 examples from his own time and place.
First, he says, whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to them as well.
In the ancient Roman world, a right cheek slap with the back of the right hand was a symbolic way of dominating someone.
And humiliating them.
But Jesus says, don't retaliate. Rather, stand your ground and offer them the left cheek. This will force your attacker to strike with an open right hand. In other words, to strike you like an equal.
And it forces them to treat you as a fellow human being.
Yes, even if it costs you.
Well, next, Jesus says, if anyone sues you and takes your shirt, let him have your coat also?
Yeah, in ancient Israel, taking a poor person's coat was against the law because it's also their blanket to keep warm at night.
But a really uncaring person could find a way around this by demanding their shirt as payment.
Right. So Jesus offers a creative response. Give them your shirt and also give them your coat.
Why would you do that? Wouldn't that leave you exposed?
Exactly. Jesus is being provocative. The goal is to shock everyone around by exposing this injustice through costly generosity.
The third example is whoever forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2.
In Jesus' day, a Roman soldier could force any subject to carry their packs for them up to 1 mile.
How humiliating and dangerous.
And so Jesus says, carry that load not just 1 mile, but 2. The first mile, he might treat you like a pack animal, but by going that second mile, you assert your humanity as you choose to treat him like a friend.
Wait, treat an enemy oppressor like a friend?
Yeah, it sounds crazy. But Jesus is saying that bold generosity can subvert the power games of our world and even turn enemies into friends. And that leads to the last law that Jesus quotes.
You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.
Jesus is quoting an ancient biblical law when he says, love your neighbor. But then he quotes a popular line that many Israelites added to the law, but you can hate your enemy. Jesus counters this by telling his followers, love your enemies and pray for those who mistreat you.
Now, isn't this going a bit far? Peace with my enemies is one thing, but loving them?
Yes, Jesus seems to think that true peace is only possible when we treat every human as if they have ultimate value, which means that even my enemy is a fellow image of God.
But how am I supposed to love someone who hates me? It's hard enough to love the people that love me.
And our love for our friends and our family is a good thing. But for Jesus, that is just the starting point. He challenges his followers to share that same love outside our circles of comfort. And he holds up God's indiscriminate, generous love as the model.
Jesus says, God causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous.
The call is to become peacemakers who are inviting others in, working to mend broken relationships at every level in our communities.
It really is a radical way to live.
Yes. Jesus calls it becoming complete when he says, be complete just as your heavenly Father is complete. It means imitating God's generosity to both friends and enemies, because for Jesus, creative love is the only pathway to real peace.
We just finished the teachings of Jesus on how to do right by others in our most difficult relationships.
Next, Jesus will explore the problem of religious hypocrisy and how it can ruin even our best attempts to honor God.
I love those videos. So, what'd you think? So we ended last week with oaths, right? Yes be yes, no be no. And that's for us to live the example, right? I think it's the easiest of these three, but I suspect if you're anything like me anyways, it's probably not that easy. Yet, it is a much clearer example of being, as in letting folks know that you're a follower of God, right? You don't need a bumper sticker, a hat, t-shirt, pin. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no. You're already putting God on display. And that's probably one of the scarier parts, really, when we really think about it, that what we do when we say what we say, even through the little things, when we don't do it, that puts us on God display. That puts God on display, too. Because I'm as guilty as everyone, trust me. Even if I didn't say on a stack of Bibles, we are all on display. Because, like I said, they read the book. Funny enough, maybe sometimes more thorough than us. And then we wonder why people don't follow our Messiah. Probably because our stories don't match. Tim used a word, and I liked it, and it harkens back to Matthew 5:9, that peacemaker, that being a peacemaker is a radical form of honesty. I liked it. And that peacemaker phrase, well, it's going to come up more and more. It's just a start, just the tip of that iceberg, the peacemaker iceberg. And then Tim segues in the next part. Turn the other cheek. This is one of those points I really find fascinating. Where it's taken from, right? From the famous eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth phrase of Scripture. Yeah, I agree. It's been abused, misused, misquoted, and distorted. And I did kind of like how Tim explains it. He refers to it as the law of retaliation. Sometimes we've heard it's called the law of reciprocity. Yeah. Then it gets to what John says. That sounds like it's like a license for you to hit me if I hit you. And it just bounces back and forth. But this is where we like to take it. But then Jesus, well, he turned it on its ear. Because this is an upside down thought. This is not the way we want it to be. Because we still live by this way, right? We still live by the way we've heard it said. Because I think we just don't want to let it go. Then Tim brings up the point that the purpose of this particular instruction, that particular law, is to be a limiter. It's a limiter on what can happen, right? No more. It's the equal balance. It lays balance in the judgment. It's God's part of justice, right? Equal measure. Yet I think we rather like the justice in our own hands. We're going to be the justice for God, to be the God squad vigilante, right? We like those big words for us. We love the V for vigilante. Yet, I don't see them in Jesus' vocabulary. I don't see them in God's vocabulary. That's definitely not the words he uses. In this particular law, this just merely the fact that justice scales will be balanced. There's going to be no overage. The loss is equal to the payment. The infraction is how it's dealt with no preference. No, always in equal scales. But it's more fun to dole out, right? It's more fun to, we want it that way. We want to be the vigilante. Jesus doesn't want that. It's interesting. We like to live it that way, be the harbinger of justice. But we want the opposite of that when God looks at us, what's from God. We want exactly the opposite. We want God to treat us differently than we like to treat others. Yet Jesus says we're supposed to treat each other, everyone, like we want, like we hope, like we expect God to treat us. We've heard this before. We do it because God does it. I like how John puts it. He sees this as a law designed to keep peace. We just like to use it to see our ways of acting out. But then again, I'm not sure we're driven by keeping the peace. It's sad, really, because Jesus makes at a very important point, right? Peacemaker. And I do believe there's an attitude about that. And there's quite a blessing that goes with that. Matthew 5:9. And of course, when Jesus steps up to the point and he says, he bumps it up. Don't even ask for the balance. Don't even ask for equal treatment. Don't even ask for what the due scale is. He said, let it go. Let it go. But our response is, we can't do that. It's mine. We fight to hold on to it. We fight for the justice part. Jesus shifts it. He makes it even more important, more different for us. Let it go. Because I love when we get to this point. I've heard this statement once. I've literally heard it 1,000 times. Well, we can't just, or we want to, we want to stand by and do nothing, right? Are we supposed to just stand around and do nothing? Yet, I think in our actions, our choices, maybe our choosing not to act, this is very much woven in the fabric of the Sermon on the Mount. I just tend to believe we're not really sure about the whole thing, especially those treasures in heaven thing. That's about getting what we want and doing what we want here. We want to balance it here because God might miss it. And I love Tim's cultural look, right, into who slaps you. And I love how it's played out. We see it in the movies. It's kind of funny, that gauntlet slap, right? That glove peeled off, smacked across the face. Yeah, grab the gauntlet, steel or wool, right? It's a backhanded swipe. You backhand somebody. Again, we've seen the movies over and over and over. It's that affront, right? It's that challenge. It's that, so now honor is at stake, right? This is the point that we hang on to. Honor is at stake. So we want to fight. We want to defend God's honor. Jesus, he says, give him the other cheek. You know, he actually ends up showing us this very thing of what it can look like. Oh, and the cost. I'll show you what you should do if you really want to defend my honor, if you really want to defend me, if you really want to be an example of what I want them to see, turn the other cheek. What I want you to do, turn the other cheek. Give them the other side. Again, I think I love how Tim put it in the cultural context, that second slap, that slap coming at you with the open palm, right? That open hand going the other way changes things. It shifts the status, as it were. All are going to see it. They will see the other cheek. Changes the status. But do we want to do it? No. We don't like it. No, it's not fun. No, it's difficult. No, it hurts. And this is both literal and metaphorical. It's allegoric. Many positions apply here. Many situations apply here. Most of which we just want to wiggle out of, hoping that in our situation, this just doesn't apply. Turn the other cheek. We don't want to. Again, we love to read the words right from the middle of the stuff. Again, we just don't want to do it. I encourage you to watch the entire video from the Bible Project. I just played the main part for our discussion, but there's more, right? Because at the end, there's more to their making of parts of the show. I think it's neat, and I think there's more to be helpful in that part for you to see. Because they make a point to talk about how they approach the animation, even with the opening scene. There's this line drawn, these lines of separation. Somebody on one side, somebody on the other side. Doesn't matter who drew the metaphorical line, it's there. Now, how do we deal with those lines, that separation, that division? And Jesus, he's looking us to act differently. Here comes that word, that phrase again. Peacemaker. So now, when you go back and watch the video, pay attention. The lines and who crosses them. The character whose cheek is slapped. The scene changes from the real world to the heart world. And that line, that metaphorical life, it's very visual in the heart realm. It's that jagged crevasse. And the stripes, the marks on their cheeks. But it's they who chose to cross the line. They crossed the other side. And then they're slapped on the other cheek. They chose to cross the line. They're going to make the first move. It's with the other cheek. I love this scene. It's very powerful. And its result, it's going to have an eternal impact. Whether we believe it or not, it will. And to be truthful, the person that's doing it, the one doing the slapping, probably they're not going to get it. At least in the beginning. They might. I'm just not so sure. I guess part of it depends on if they're even capable of getting it. Yet as we know, with kingdom life and what Jesus is calling us to do as kingdom citizens, it's just because everybody else is looking from the outside in. That's one of the key points of Torah. That God says, when you do this, the nations on the outside looking in, they're going to see it. They're going to be jealous. They're going to see that behavior. And if it's done the way it could be, I might put it out there should be, then this is the example that they're going to see. So Jesus is saying the same thing. He's going right out of Torah. But this is Jesus saying, I'm giving you some good examples of what it looks like. Especially now. Because now, you're in an occupied land. You're in your land. But remember, these are the lost sheep of Israel that Jesus said he came for. But now, this land is occupied under Roman rule. Yet this is how I want you to live here. To be an example, not only here, but there. Because you're going to take this living way out, wherever you go. And I love what Tim said, when we're doing this, and Jesus is looking at you, it's going to cost you too. I think sometimes we think that following Jesus doesn't have a cost. I think sometimes we think that because following Jesus was free, it didn't cost us anything to choose to follow this God. That this God has no fealty price, right? There isn't anything that says, if you keep paying for it, you're going to get it. Kind of like insurance. And it's not like a subscription, right? If you keep following him, then you keep paying your dues, then God works for you. Problem is, that's not the God we see in the scriptures, the ones that they read too. Because we can't buy God. You can't do for God. Just like the other mount, at Mount Sinai. It was a free choice. But it cost them their lives. Following in the footsteps of Jesus, Still, choice is free. But like he's making it clear here in the Sermon on the Mount, it's going to cost you your life. Don't forget, description below, the link to the folks at the Bible Project and a link to the app so you can follow along and see each one as they premiere and the additional topics that they discuss. Because this will continue to be an exciting and thought-provoking journey in the Sermon on the Mount. I just wonder we're going to continue to uncover. So, thanks for with us tonight. With more with this Sermon on the Mount in part 2 of 3, another episode of The Dusty Feet.